A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the wine drinking world, and welcome to a show that is full of history today as we celebrate, albeit a day late, 363 years of making wine in South Africa. That's one of the key parts of today's show. There was an event held at Constantia yesterday evening, celebrating not just 363 remarkable years, but also some remarkable people in the wine industry. So this evening, armed with a bottle of Groot Constantia Pinotage, I finally get Boela Gerber onto the show. We had to speak to his manager, who had to speak to his commercial team, who had to clear it through 9 levels of senior management, but we finally got one of the rock stars of the South African wine world with us. We also head to a slightly different part of the wine world, Cape Agulhas, and the wines of Land's End. How do they plug into Du Toitskloof? Well, Ed Beukes is on the show to join us. And we have a collaborative effort as the wineries of Durbanville come together for something rather special to celebrate their valley. And Jenna Higgins is with us from Durbanville Hills Winery to explain what the wine is and to drink it with me, which is, of course, rather important. So 3 really cool guests as we run through the show. But to kick off, let's have a quick look at 1 or 2 things happening in the world of wine. All right, this is coming up. We mentioned this earlier on in the week, but it's coming up again. This is the Constantia Fresh Food and Wine Festival. Mainly a wine festival. There's some food there too, but the focus very much on the wine that they have. This is Higo Jacobs, sommelier extraordinaire, and the man who, together with Roland Peens, puts together the wines for the auctions that are held with the Strauss Fine Wine team. Here he turns his hand to a rather special gathering, and that's taking place at Buitenverwachting. Lars and his team preparing to host a whole pile of people. Tickets are limited. If you haven't got one yet, I think there are still the last couple left, and you can get those at constantiafresh.com. I haven't been there for a while, but the last one I went to was enormously good fun, so highly recommend that. There will be, amongst the wine, I'm sure, some Constantia bubbles floating about. Speaking of bubbles, there is a new bottle that lands on shelves. Not lands on shelves, I think it goes out to members of the wine club tomorrow. This is from Antonie Rupert, and it is coming out tomorrow. You can see there the picture of the bottle up at the top. It is the Lomarin Private Cuvée 2014. So 8 years in the making. We were going to chat to Gareth Robertson from Antonie Rupert today. We're holding that off till next week as the wine is only being properly released tomorrow. And that's the wine club members will get a sneak peek, but we'll have an early look at it next week. And also have a look out for the Dan Really Likes Wine show that's currently running, our recorded show that includes a rather cool competition. We'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So there's your wine news for today. Let's leave the news behind and let's head out to our 3 guests coming from 3 very different parts of the South African wine map. Delighted to have all of them. So very, very warm welcome to Jenna, to Ed, and to Boela. Welcome, guys. Lovely to have you all on the show.
Thank you.
I have to say, Jenna and Ed, with absolutely no disrespect, I think Boela's gone one up on the both of you, because here's a man who's just casually opened himself Magnum to work his way through the show this evening. Good going there, Boela. Welcome to the show. Big smile on face, as there should be. It was a rather special night down at Groot Constantia yesterday. Tell us about what happened and why it's so important to you guys.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, so last night was the Harvest commemorative event. It's quite an amazing event. I think South Africa, we're the only country in the world, that can sort of boast that we actually know the birth date of our wine industry. So 2nd of Feb, I'm sure you guys all know that the 2nd of Feb, 1659 was the first time that wine was made. There's a note in Jan van Riebeck's journal that said, praise be to God, today the first wine was made the first time from Cape grapes. So yeah, so that's actually quite cool. That on a particular Sunday in 1659, Jan, as a little hobby, made pressed some grapes and made some wine. So Groot Constantia, quite a few years ago, about more than 10 years ago, decided to pick up this event, and it's not a Constantia event. It's a South African event. I think it's a celebration for the whole industry to celebrate the harvest, and also sort of commemorate the first day that wine was made, the first time that wine was made in South Africa. So it's good fun. It's really nice, and then we also use that event to honor a few people that add value to the industry in different. There was like a single award in the past, but now it's branched out to do a few different awards. And where we honor people that's made a significant contribution to our amazing industry.
I want to touch on those people in just a moment, but let's talk for a second about the importance. We sit in wine terms in the New World, and yet 363 years, it makes us longer wine producers, older wine producers than certain parts of France, let alone the rest of Europe. I think it's not just a really important date for stuff in wine industry, but it's quite a cool one to hang our hat on for the rest of the world, just to remind them that we've actually been doing this for a while now.
You know what, Dan, it's interesting. Quite a few years ago, the previous winemaker of Dom Perignon, Richard Geoffroy, he was in South Africa for the first time, just before his retirement. He was in South Africa for the first time, and he came to visit us here, and we spoke about history and all the rest. And he was surprised to hear that the Groot Constantia was about as old as Champagne. Dom Perignon lived about 20 or 30 years before Groot Constantia was established. So I mean, it's quite amazing. You spoke about regions around the world. Something else is that I think we all know that the Constantia Valley is older than Cabernet Sauvignon. The Medoc was a swamp that was laid dry by the Dutch in the late 1600s, before all those famous chateaus, Mouton and Margaux and Lafitte. That was only established sort of late 16, early 1700s. Cabernet Sauvignon was a natural cross that happened in the area in the late 16th, early 1700s. Again, the South African wine industry is older than Cabernet. So, like you said earlier, it is actually quite nice to say, listen, we could put a date to it, to our birth of the South African wine industry, and it's not insignificant. Even on an international scale, it's not an insignificant to make wine continuously for more than 3 centuries.
I suspect there are one or two of the slightly more senior members of the Cape Winemakers Guild who would have been around at about that time. But given that we don't have any of them on the show, I'll ask you instead, Boela, 363 years ago, what would that wine have been like, the wine that was made? Would it be anything similar to what we have today? Would it have been vaguely drinkable by today's standards?
Dan, it's a difficult question. It's quite interesting. I think in the beginning, it's quite interesting. So we don't see the Dutch really as the Netherlands, as prime winemaking region, okay? But interesting, Van der Stel, who was the first owner here of Constantia, Van der Stel was family-owned wine vineyards in Netherlands. So they had some idea of winemaking. It was not absolutely nothing. But I do think that the first few attempts to wine was probably not that great. It was interesting. I was having a chat to Rico Basson from Vinpro last night, and also to Hanneke de Pre, who was one of the previous director of Heritage Western Cape. It's quite interesting that apparently they sort of interspersed, and they had, after the French Huguenots, they had like sort of a Dutchman and a Frenchman and a Dutchman and a Frenchman. That's how they divided the farms. So that every Dutchman would have a Frenchman close by to sort of show him. And apparently, if you look at the roads in Paul, you'll still see sort of alternative sort of Dutch and French names, because that is how they did it. They sort of mixed the whole bunch, that the French could show the Dutch how to make wine. But I do think that it was interesting. Apparently, they in the early 1700s, the Cape wine, they referred to Cape wine as Cape smoke. And apparently there was a translation of the sort of Kaapse smaak, which referred to the not always pleasant taste of the Cape wine. So I do think in the first few decades, the wines from the Cape were not necessarily under par we would have liked it to be.
Next time you have one of those openings, you have my phone number, Mr. Gerber. I will drop everything. It could be my wedding anniversary. I will be there to share that particular wine with you. You talk about the collaborative effort there between the Dutch and the French. There's a collaborative effort happening in Durbanville as well. This particular bottle arrived in my cellar late last year. The Durbanville Wine Valley. You might be looking at that, thinking, doesn't look like a particular estate label I've seen before. Well, that's because you haven't. It's a collaborative effort. Let's find out between who, Jenna. Lovely to have you on the show. Give us a little bit about the background and Team Durbanville coming together to make something special.
Thanks, Dan. It's lovely to be here. So this was a collaborative effort between Taste Low at Diemersdal and Wilhelm here at Durbanville Hills. And they got the grapes from Morgenstad, which is one of the farms here in Durbanville. And it is actually the farm that the original George Spies cab comes from. So this wine was made with the idea of trying to portray similar characters to the original George Spies that got the 100-point rating with Jancis Robertson. When was it? It's quite recently, actually. So that was the 1966, I think, if I'm correct. And the winemakers really wanted to portray the ageability of cab from Durbanville and the balance of the cab as well, which you can taste when you taste the wine. It's actually still showing as quite a young wine. So Taste and Wilhelm came together. They made the wine in their way. So Taste on his side of the valley at Diemersdal, Wilhelm on his side of the valley here at Durbanville Hills. The wine was made in small batches in barrels. Everything was done by hand. So very hands-on, old school, very slow, patient and creative and loving winemaking went into this. And you can definitely taste it in the glass.
If you're watching this and you don't know the GS66, do a little Google search. It's a fascinating story. We're not 100% sure George Spies actually made the wine. It's full of intrigue and smoke and mirrors, but it's a super cool story. And it's great that it's now been reinterpreted and reimagined. But I'd imagine slightly challengingly so, in that all winemakers have their own style and their own approach. How did they get this right, Jenna? How did they come together and ensure that the two approaches merged into one wine that they felt, yep, this is the tribute to Mr. Spies?
So I'm sure a lot of tasting was involved in that process. Actually, I'm pretty convinced that there was a lot of tasting involved. A lot of the winemakers in the valley also gave their weight. So they tasted the different barrels. There were 2 at Durbanville Hills, and there was a 500-liter barrel at Diemersdal. And then they played around with the blend percentages of the 2 wines. And quite honestly, I think that the styles have blended in perfectly with each other. So Diemersdal's got a richer, fuller style, very fruit-driven, and Durbanville Hills, you get a little bit of the green characteristics coming through with a lot of the wood. So I think that the fruit and the wood are very well integrated, and I think it's a perfect balance of the 2 opposite ends of the valley and 2 very different winemaking styles that actually came together and made something really beautiful.
The motivation to make this very beautiful wine, I suspect, I'm going to try it in a moment to be sure I agree with you. I'm pretty certain I will. The motivation, I think you've already spoken of in part in the same terroir from that George Spies wine and paying tribute to him. But in choosing the first of this series, because I believe there will be more to come, most people have thought, well, if you're doing a Durbanville wine, that'll be a Sauvignon Blanc, of course, because that's the Durbanville Hills calling card. But I think over the last year or two, we've not only seen other white varietals on the show from Durbanville, particularly Chenin Blanc, but we've also seen more and more red. I know that the private reserve out of Diemersdal is doing particularly well from a red side, and Durbanville Hills, all sorts of great reds. So it's quite a big statement, this, isn't it? That we're not just about white wine, we're not just about Sauvignon Blanc. We can do some pretty special red stuff as well in the valley.
So we started off with a red, and the feedback has been fantastic. But we also do have a little bit of something else in the works here. We're going to rope all 14 producers into producing a collaborative Sauvignon Blanc under the Durbanville Wine Valley label as well. And that is almost riding on the wave of the success that the Valley had last year with all of the finalists for Sauvignon Blanc. So I think we had 4 finalists in the top 20. So I think Durbanville, we wanted to show everybody that we're not just about Sauvignon Blanc, but everybody loves our Sauvignon Blanc. So we thought we'd all team up and see if we can put something together that the market is going to be crazy about.
It's one of the challenges of South Africa. We don't have a particular calling card because we just get so much different wine right. And it's both a wonderful space to be in, but it can make it a little challenging in terms of some of the marketing. But it's a challenge to be happily accepted because it does mean we've got such a fabulous array of wine made by a fabulous array of people, which brings me back to Boela and the awards given out last night. And Alice, I think you're in the wine industry, Boela. If you look at the list of names, not all of them would have been that familiar to people there, but you've got some very, very important people in the South African wine community who've had a huge impact over the years. They got, I think, some very just and some very deserved reward last night.
Yeah, so I think starting last year they gave more than one award. So last night there were 4 awards that people that celebrated. The first one was a lady by the name of Denise Stubbs. And I'll be very honest, I don't know Denise very well. I got to meet her last night and her partner last night. She's a really amazing woman. So she's the managing director of Thokozani Group of Companies. And she's also on the board of WOZA, a really inspirational person. So she was awarded for her contribution to diversity and transformation. But I think she started in HR. She went from Mediclinic to Diemersdal, and the team there at Diemersdal really saw this value in her, and they invested in her. And she's they're very proud of her. She's a really amazing person. So Denise, something that I didn't really know that well. That I think it's amazing when you get to know the person and the story. Really is an amazing, inspirational woman. So it was really nice to meet her and hear her story as well last night. And the category for wine appreciation and wine advancement was Christine Radman. We all, not for good to say we all, but I think most of us in the industry know Christine. She's been around for ages, one of the first Cape Wine Masters as well. And I mean, a real inspiration. I think Christine, tasted in every panel in South Africa, all the South African wine competitions and a few international ones as well. So, Christine's always been present. So when I started in the industry, Christine was really somebody that we sort of look up to, and so it was amazing to celebrate Christine as well. For viticulture and wine creation, they awarded Francois Fillion. He was with Vinpro for many years, started in Robertson and later head of Vinpro. So I think it's more an industry thing. The guys in the industry, we often lean quite heavily on Vinpro when it comes to viticulture and their advice. We at Constantia as well, we also used Francois' team for many years, to help us to look after our vineyards. So they really do fantastic work, and Francois really did some amazing stuff, to head up that team and to really sort of, look after the vineyards of the whole Western Cape. So, he's got amazing knowledge and very happy to share. So it was really lucky to see Francois get some reward as well. And then for vision and leadership was Carmen Stevens. Carmen was the first person of color to study winemaking. She was at Alsenberg, finishing in '95. Very strong class. When the likes of Dewald Heinz, Pierre Wald, David Nieuwoud, Brewer Raats, it's quite a strong class, that class of '95. And Carmen's made a few wines. I think she was Tukulu wines. And then I think it was at Amani, and then started Carmen Steven Wines a few years ago. So I think also trailblazing for women winemakers, and then obviously sort of winemakers of color as well. So it was quite nice to see Carmen also get some reward. So it really is a very diverse crowd, and then some for me some new faces as well, but some really interesting contributions to the industry. So, I mean, I must say that is something that we really appreciate from our industry, is all that sort of diversity and all the different angles to it, and all the different personalities. It was really cool to experience all of that last night.
And I think all the more meaningful to you, Boela, and not just personally, but as a brand, as Groot Constantia, because of the nature of the Groot Constantia setup and how it works. For people who perhaps don't know those details, maybe just give us a quick snapshot of the structure behind Groot Constantia and its rather unique setup.
Yeah, you know what, Dan, it is actually quite amazing because, a lot of people in the industry and friends that I've known for a long time don't really understand. So Beukes Constantia as a trust, it's a non-profit, and it's a non-profit company, and it's a NGO as well. It's a non-government company. It was called into life by the Parliament, the previous regime in 1993, that placed Beukes Constantia into this trust. And it's quite interesting. Our CEO Jean, he said he calls it, it's a non-profit. It's Beukes Constantia is a trust that looks after the wine heritage of South Africa. So that is without costing the taxpayer money. So it's not government owned. It used to be government owned like 30 plus years ago, but for the last 30 years it's been NGO and non-profit, as unfortunately most wine farms are in South Africa at the moment. But yeah, so it literally is sort of looking after the wine heritage. And I think the commemorative wine harvest function, I think is just showing what we are trying to achieve. That is not sort of what we do here in Constantia alone, but also inviting other stakeholders, inviting other people, other sort of wine regions, and getting role players like Vinpro as well to get them involved and really sort of invite the whole industry and say, but this is not about Groot Constantia or about Constantia. This is really sort of everyone's celebration. So that is what we are trying to achieve with that.
And that from one of the spiritual homes of South African wine in Groot Constantia. It's a great example of a different and very broadly empowering approach to wine from a place that's been making wine, as Boela said, for 363 years around the world. Constantia is immediately identified as a wine area. A little less so, perhaps, would be Cape Agulhas. But while it might be a little newer on the wine map, it's certainly having a considerable impact. Ed Beukes is our other guest today. Ed, a warm welcome. Give us a little bit of an introduction to the wines of Land's End, where we find them, and what makes this particular place quite so special.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, I feel a little bit intimidated with all the other Sauvignon Blanc producers online, because Land's End and the Agulhas Wine Triangle, where Land's End is from, is the youngest wine region, the new kid on the block. But I think definitely taking its place in the Sauvignon Blanc category in South Africa. So we also have some history. I mean, we can go back to 1848 when the lighthouse was erected in the most southern point in Africa. But it's only been in around the early 90s when they really started with viticulture in the area. And Land's End, also the oldest brand from the area, was actually an experimental brand that was started by Charles Hopkins, Hein Kuchlenberg, Johan Wiese, as I said, in the early 90s. And the first brand that they named was Land's End. And for about 10 years, it was, the young, new, as I've said, kid on the block. And about 10 years going into winemaking in the area, the brand was taken over by Hidden Valley, managed from Stellenbosch, and that was 2006. And then another 10 years later, the Toyskloof Winery took over the brand and have been managing it since 2016. So very, very cool area, not just the people, but also the cool climate style wines that you get from there. And I think what's very distinct is the terroir, and specifically the Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, two cultivars that are really, really prominent in the area. I spoke to a couple of people, and we really say that it's salty wines. There's a saltiness to the wines. It might just be because it's the extreme weather conditions and the waves that literally burst over the vineyards. But a very special place to be in, and exciting to see the 10 or so members of the Agulhas Wine Triangle that include names like Lomont, Ghost Corner, the Berrio, Black Oyster Catcher, Seine, Olivedale, Strandveld, and the likes.
It's a collection of young but very, very exciting wine brands, as you've said, and you are very much amongst them. In fact, I'm drinking the Sauvignon Blanc at the moment. Anywhere that was started off by people like Hein Kuchlenberg and the great Charles Hopkins has clearly got some wine pedigree behind it. Now sits within your particular stable. Before we sample this wine and tell me a little bit more about it, give us a sense of your history of the time that you guys have been working with this and how you've seen this particular brand develop.
Absolutely, Dan. I think it's been a very fun journey for De Toyskloof. De Toyskloof became well known for Sauvignon Blanc in around the early 2000s when the De Toyskloof was awarded a Top 10 Sauvignon Blanc award at the F&B Top 10 Sauvignon Blanc. And then, growing and becoming well known as a Sauvignon Blanc producer, it was, I think, a very strategic move for De Toyskloof to take over a brand from a different area with grapes from a different region and again produce award-winning Sauvignon Blanc. So when De Toyskloof took over Land's End in 2016, one of origin remained Cape Agulhas. We get our grapes from the small ward Elim and around Agulhas. And in 2018, we managed to win another top 10 Sauvignon Blanc title for Land's End. And I think that was really kudos to the winemakers to show that they can make really good Sauvignon Blanc with grapes coming from different areas. And since then, it's been a really a wonderful journey. We've been working with the first tier, which we call the Cape South Coast tier. And in 2021, we launched the Cape Agulhas tier, which is a bit more premium. Smaller volumes, we're looking at between 2,500 and 5,000 liters for the Syrah and the Sauvignon Blanc. And yes, where we're at now, we're looking at about 90% of Land's End being exported and only really 10% of the brand being enjoyed locally.
Well, part of that small percentage is me right now because I have it here. And I have to say, I've got a long history. I'm not sure if you know this. I've got a long history with De Toyskloof because as a student at UCT, when as we were university students, I was on a rather modest budget. I discovered and fell in love with Dupré, Apollo's Red, and pretty much anything made by De Toyskloof because it was lovely wine at a price that definitely fitted into my bracket. And I've always remembered you fondly from there, which is why getting to experience your other label was a particular delight and is, as I'm doing now, a particular delight. There's not just the salinity that you speak of, there's a lovely perfume to this wine. You can't miss it the moment you open that particular bottle. What's the aim here? What sort of style is your winemaker approaching here? What are you trying to deliver with this particular Sauvignon Blanc?
I think we want to stay true to the area. As I've said, if you taste a range of Sauvignon Blancs, the Sauvignon Blancs coming from that area are really distinct in its saltiness, very strong mineralistic component to the wine. And then there's this flintiness, there's this fynbos, greener element that comes through, and then also quite a few tropical notes. So with this wine, we find it, kind of the sharper kiwi tropical notes. And we've actually, a lot of people have thought that it's wooded. It's not. It spends a short time, extended time actually on the lees, 4 months. But I think what makes these wines really special is that they have a very high natural acidity, like most of the wines from that region, and that really comes forth. So I think the idea with this wine is really to put the region in the glass, and that's what you experience when you drink wines from Elim. You taste Elim, you taste Cape Agulhas.
Well, there's a wonderful fullness and richness to the wine, and the acidity is very balanced as well. You're not going to be diving off for an industrial-sized box of Rennies with a glass of this, which is so important with Sauvignon Blanc. A delightful glass. I want to find a little bit more about the broader range in a second, but let's head over to some other Sauvignon Blanc territory and not talk about Sauvignon Blanc, talk about this instead. So, Jenna, I am pouring my glass of your collaborative effort. Only 1,200 bottles of this made, so the other 1,199 will have to be sought after if this is something that you want to get your hands on. 2016, so this has obviously been a project that you guys have had in mind for some time.
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the idea of this wine was to try and mimic the ageability of the original GS cab. which I think they've done pretty well if you give it a little bit of a sniff. If you were to compare this with, for example, it's a 2016 vintage. If you were to compare it with a 2018 or a 2019 in a blind tasting, I don't think you would know that this is a 2016 vintage. This wine is still very youthful. You're still getting a lot of the fruit aromas and flavors coming through. It hasn't really given way to all of the tertiary aromas and all of the wood yet. So that speaks volumes to me, and I think that Wilhelm and Tess have done a very good job with this wine.
All right, put on your professional wine drinking hat here for a moment, swig back a rather large glass, and then tell me for you as a young winemaker with a very practiced palate, what makes it so nice for you to drink?
Well, for me, I've described this wine as not just Christmas cake in a glass, but the entire Christmas meal. It just reminds me of Christmas through and through. All of the smells of my mother cooking in the kitchen and the hearty family vibes, and it just pulls everything together. It's definitely the kind of wine you'd want at a table. Typical cab for me. I get a lot of that cherry tobacco characteristic coming through on the nose with a lot of blackberry and almost black currant characters. And then on the palate, I do get a little bit of a cocoa characteristic coming through as well. And I think a little bit of the wood spice, a little bit of nutmeg and cloves on the finish.
A fairly comprehensive set of tasting notes. Translation, it is rather nice and well worth trying to get your hands on. If, of course, you can, which is the natural next question. If somebody's watching this thinking, oh, Jenna's made that sound delightful, I'd love to get my hands on some. Is any available, or did it all immediately disappear into the hands of very excited friends of Durbanville?
So part of this project is to try and entice people to come and visit the valley. So there's a few wine farms in the valley that are actually selling this in a beautiful wooden box. It comes in a 3-bottle collection, and that retails at 950 Rand, which I think is an absolute steal for this wine. And the idea is that you're supposed to come and visit the valley and then try and find the wine farms that are selling it. I know we do have it at our tasting room. Groot Santa Carl's got a few. Diemersdal's got a few. So I would really encourage anybody who's watching to actually come and visit us and come and try the wine and come and seek it out.
And have the bonus of one of the finest views in wine territory, that sweeping sight of Table Bay out to Robben Island from the top of the tasting area at Durbanville. This wine came with a tasting note from Benny Howard at Mirandale. If Benny is giving it his thumbs up, then you know it must be pretty special. So that is a red wine out of Durbanville, where Sauvignon Blanc is king, but they can clearly make some other stuff rather well. Sauvignon Blanc also very much king in Constantia, but also many good reds coming out of the area, including the one I have got here. You sent me a bottle of Pinotage, Mr. Gerber, for which I am very grateful. Well, what's your sense, just very broadly speaking, of Pinotage in South Africa, in that it's a much maligned wine over the years? It became kind of cool to rubbish South African Pinotage, mostly by people who'd never actually drunk it, but it was just the thing to do. The quality, I think, has improved immeasurably. It was never nearly as bad as anybody said, but also the styles have transformed. And yet, as South Africa's leading wine, there's so much competition from Chenin Blanc and from Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon and from Swartland Syrah and so many different wines. So where do you feel Pinotage is at the moment for South Africa?
That is an interesting question, because I think you're correct in saying that Pinotage is a variety that people like to hate or like to bash. But the variety has come a long way. I think about just more than 20 years ago, there were some comments from the UK and also the local press, about certain unpleasant characters associated with Pinotage specifically. And obviously, we as producers didn't think it was really funny. But Stellenbosch University has done some great research and sort of got to the bottom of this. So I do think some of that bitterness and funkiness that may have been associated with Pinotage, I'm talking 20 odd years ago now. I think those things have been largely eliminated. And I think the styles at the moment, it's a lot sharper. It's definitely a lot more focused. There's some really amazing stuff in the market. So I think it's a fabulous variety. It's an extremely versatile variety. It's quite interesting. We often Pinotage is usually the one we release first, purely just because it sells out so quickly. There's definitely a serious demand for Pinotage. It may be because it's a uniquely South African variety from old South African wine estate. But we've seen here, it's been extremely popular, and we don't produce small volumes of that, any smaller than other varieties. So it's just been extremely popular. We've seen at the restaurants as well. The one restaurant in the historical core Yonker size do a lot of Cape Malay inspired food. And as you will know, it's often very tricky to pair wine with spicy food. And Pinotage, it stands up. That has, it's a lot of fruit. That's the one thing of Pinotage. It's very sort of open in your face. It's got a lot of fruit, so that it has that intensity to stand up. It's for me, it's an extremely versatile wine. So yeah, I mean, I'm a really big fan. I think it is, unfortunately, like you said, it's not everyone's favorite, but I do think it has a place. So for me, the other thing about Pinotage that I do enjoy is, there was a certain style of Pinotage that was celebrated. I think it still is. The ABSA Pinotage top 10. So over how many years now? And it's probably more than 20 years that they've been running this competition. And there's a particular style, and guys like Kanonkorp and Rijks, I think the two wine farms that's won the most accolades. And other places like Lavanier and Netherksdorp also doing quite well in this competition. And that's a particular style, that's quite big, bold, often a lot of oak and ripe style. But having said that, there are a lot of new styles emerging as well over the last few years that show the versatility of it. There are a few guys in Elgin. There's a crazy Kunderoos from Spioenkorp that's making this really sort of funky style of Pinotage, a lot more restrained, a lot more Pinot inspired Pinotage that I think it offers something that's completely different. I think there's a lot more different angles to Pinotage. As in Constantia, again, the climate is very different, and obviously the wine stylistically, it will show a very different, more elegant, more feminine side of this intriguing variety. There was the rise of coffee Pinotage. I spoke to the owners of Diemersdal last night. And love it or hate it, but there's a place for it. That's a huge successful style of Pinotage, and it may not be everyone's the preference, but I do think what Diemersdal and all the guys that tried to copy them subsequently have done, they definitely opened the door for people to appreciate wine. I think it was a lot more sort of accessible style. People, it was always a bit reluctant. That found wine intimidating. All of a sudden, but there's Pinotage that reminds of coffee, and it's less intimidating, a lot more accessible, and get people from beer or whatever to sort of get into the wine drinking culture, and hopefully from there sort of progress to something else. And if they don't, that's fine too. But I think it's actually quite this gateway drug, like sort of this gateway variety and style of wine, sort of into wine. So so many different styles of Pinotage out there today, and it's definitely. I think as a wine lover, you'll definitely find between all those styles, you'll definitely find one of those styles of Pinotage that will appeal to you.
I remember chatting to Francois Roeder, the winemaker at Diemersfontein on the show last year, and recalling accidentally stumbling into Diemersfontein many, many years ago. I was still at university, and they'd been given by one of the guests there, one of the hosts there, something new to try, and it was their first vintage of their now famous Pinotage, and what a journey Pinotage has been on since then. I'm going to throw some back in a moment. Before I do that, though, no Pinotage in the industrial Christmas gift that you sent me, Ed, but there's plenty of other wine, including some rather alluring Syrah, which I think I might open some of a little later on. Tell me a bit more about more of the range that you have and what it is that influences that range. Is it your terroir? Is it your winemaker? Is it the combination? How do you come up with what you decided on?
Sorry, Dan, you broke up there for a second. Could you just repeat that question?
It was about a 12-minute question. My apologies.
Focus for a second.
Just to ask you about your range beyond the Sauvignon Blanc we've tasted. What do you have, and what is the thinking behind the offering that you have? Is it purely terroir driven? Is it stuff your winemaker just loves to make? Is it a combination? What is the story to the rest of the range?
Dan, definitely, as I said earlier, terroir driven. We've decided to stick to 2 cultivars from the area, which I think you'll find at most of the wineries in the Gullis area, and that's a Sauvignon Blanc and a Syrah. So we've decided to extend one of the tiers to Cape South Coast, which means we are allowing grapes from nearby areas to create a larger volume specifically for export. And then we launched a more premium tier last year called the Cape Gullis Sauvignon Blanc and Cape Gullis Syrah, which then are the smaller batches, the 2,500, 3,000 or 5,000 liter wines that we make, either Syrah or Sauvignon Blanc. And the thinking behind it is, as I've said, terroir driven. The brand says itself, Land's End. This is the wines that you can expect from the most southern point in Africa, which is kind of a cool tagline as well.
Which leads to a question on the marketing around the wine. There is so much wine available. There's so much really good wine available. Today, we're talking about 3 fabulous brands, but you sit amongst many other fabulous brands. And I choose the word brand very specifically because that is how most wine people interpret it. They see the label somewhere, they hear the story. How important is that we are the southernmost part of the winemaking country and able to tell that story, both as your particular brand, but also as the Gullis Wine Triangle?
I think it's very important. As I've said, it's quite intimidating sitting here with the Constantia region and even Durbanville. It's great to be able to represent the youngest region and compete against some of the oldest regions, and that you can see when the accolades start coming out last year. A couple of top Syrahs as well, Trezan and the one with the Old Mutual Trophy, Strandveld as well, again in the top 10. The Berea that is being launched again, Ghost Corner, really iconic names that have made a name for themselves in a very short period of time. So I think there's definitely, if you look into, from a marketing perspective, if you look into the story of each brand, something is woven in about, the fact that in the most southern point of Africa, Cape Gullis, which is called, the Cape of Needles, compasses fail. You can't even distinguish between true north and magnetic north. There's 120 shipwrecks, lying beneath the waters. There's this mystery around the area. And even though it's the youngest area, there's so many tales untold. So I think a lot of the brands are tapping into those stories and really bringing that area to life. I believe a lot of tourists and people even traveling to South Africa think that Cape Point is the most southern point in South Africa because it's marketed so well by Cape Town. But indeed, it is actually Cape Gullis, which is where the Indian Ocean meets the Atlantic Ocean. I think there are so many stories that make the area worth visiting, and also that build great stories around the wines.
And those stories are so important in selling the wine. It looks like you have sold some, because Grant Sauls, who owns just about every wine ever made, is watching the show at the moment on YouTube. Great lineup. Looking forward to trying some Land's End. I doubt you'll be disappointed, Grant. Quickly in closing there from you, Ed, with what you have at the moment, has harvest begun? How are things looking for the new vintage? And are we expecting anything new or different from you?
Yes. Well, the one thing always with wines from Cape Gullis is you can know that it'll always be 1 or 2 vintages older than the younger vintages. I think in South Africa we are slowly moving away from the place where everyone expects you to have a 22 vintage in February. So I think once you start looking at that region, you'll see the Sauvignon Blancs that are released are normally, if we're looking at this harvest, would be 2020s being released now, 2021s being released. There won't really be a 2022 on the market. So, and when we look at the vintage ahead, we're very, very eager to receive it. But again, this is an area where these grapes take long to reach optimal ripeness because of that cool weather and cool breeze that flows over the vineyard. So in short, very excited to be going into harvest soon and just making some more phenomenal wines from the Gullis area.
All right, Grant, not the only one looking forward to that. I remember last year, Maylie Lambert was out with a couple of other media doing a trip around the Agulhas Triangle. She would not shut up about how much she enjoyed her time and how good the wine was.
Yes.
So I think I need to follow in her footsteps in 2023. I'm also due some time back at Durbanville and Devil Hills in particular. Jenna, I see you have Monique Erlang is watching, while the GS and the newly unveiled the Masters Vineyards are unrelated in many ways. Both highlight the caliber of terroir of the Durbanville wine valley. Only 1,200 bottles produced. 1,200 of this wine, many wines produced by the wineries from other varietals and other labels. Give us some idea of how things are at the moment at Durbanville Hills, Jenna. How is harvest going? Has it begun? And what's it looking like for this particular vintage?
So we did kick off last week. We got some grapes in Shannon for our Shannon Light, and that is actually looking beautiful. We got about 80 tons in, and then we got about another 16 tons in this week on Monday for our MCC. And that is going to go into barrel tomorrow. So we've got a small portion of it that goes into 2 barrels while it's still going through the base wine first fermentation. And we're looking very forward to the harvest. Next week, it looks like we're going to be drowning in grapes. Everything seems to be coming in at the same time from next week. But yeah, looking very forward to it. Our Collector's Reserve is a very fun, creative project for the winemakers, if I can put it that way. No vintage is ever the same because the winemaking changes from year to year. And Quibus and I sat in his office yesterday, and there's about 6 different winemaking techniques we're going to try in the Chardonnay alone. So looking very forward to this vintage.
You've got a terrific team at Durbanville Hills, Albert Corbus. You've also got a gentleman called Martin Moore, and I know he's important because your top wines you leave in barrel for as long as it takes Martin to finish a conversation, which can really just be years. He's a talkative gentleman. He's absolutely full of fun. He's also full of experience and winemaking wisdom. How cool has it been for you as a young winemaker, relatively early in your career, to be able to tap into that sort of experience and to be able to learn from guys who've done so much in the South African wine industry?
So it's been absolutely amazing. I don't think Martin is quite used to having somebody pop into his office 6 or 7 times within like a 30-minute span, because I've got so many questions for him. He has such a broad knowledge base on the vineyard as well. He really fully understands the harmony between the vineyard and the winemaking. So every time I hear his car keys rattle, I jump into his office and I'm like, are we going to the vineyard? I'm super excited. Because as I said, he's just got so much knowledge, and the whole idea of me moving over here was to learn as much as possible. And then we also have Wilhelm, who has a background not only here, but he was also at Flagstone for a while with Bruce Jack before he started winemaking at Durbanville Hills, and Quibus, who was at Lamont. So I'm really feeling like I should be a bit of a sponge this year and soak up as much as I can as far as that winemaking knowledge and expertise goes.
You certainly should. It sounds like you certainly are. And I do know from having chatted to the guys that they held you in very high esteem. So terrific addition to that Durbanville Hills team, as is this a terrific addition to the wine they're making alongside of Diemersdal. So not much of it made if you can get your hands on. Grant Sauls, if you're watching, is one to look out for. As we wrap up, let's head back to Constantia. I've got the Pinotage in hand and I'm sipping away at it rather happily. How's the Constantia harvest looking? How's 2022 looking for Constantia, Boela?
Dan, it's looking pretty good. Jenna, I just want to add to it. It's quite interesting, like you said, with your 3 colleagues from all those different regions. Martin Moore, the talkative Martin Moore, spent a good 6 or 7 years here at Constantia before he moved to Diemersdal Hills. So yeah, so that's something else that you can add to Martin's experience. But yeah, what we're having here at the moment is it's been tricky. Dan, I'm sure, like the other guests also explained to you, it's been all over. Geez, November, December was cool. It's a bit of a drizzle. Actually, quite a tricky harvest for. I think it's more of a viticulturist harvest than a winemaker harvest this year. The poor viticulturists really sort of ran around. I'm actually looking over our Merlots as we speak. And then January came and we had those heat waves like every weekend. We just had sort of heat wave after heat wave, and it was hot. The Constantia got probably to 30 degrees. It was extremely hot here. But no, I'm serious. It was hot here. So yeah, and then yesterday afternoon and this morning we had a drizzle. So it's a little bit all over, and I know that the vineyard guards are working very hard. You can't open up the canopies, to get sunlight in and to dry off the grapes, because you get another heat wave and you get sunburn. So it really is tricky. Keep the guys on their toes. It's still looking pretty healthy here. Our vineyard guy Flo Beukes, he's on the money. He's seriously passionate about vineyards. He's got an amazing understanding of vineyards. So it's looking decent at the moment. It's still looking pretty healthy. We've only got about 10 tons in the winery. We started some pink Boela for our rosé yesterday and the day before. So just also testing the system to see whether the crusher and the press is still working after 10 months of layoff. So we've started, but it's looking good. We've started to taste. It's still a few weeks off, so it's still very green. But the flavors are there from the white varieties that we've checked. The Sauvignons and the Chardonnays. So I'm pretty excited. Dan. I believe that we are expecting you in Cape Town, to have a braai with Duncan Savage after the harvest. So I'm looking forward to have a braai with you and Duncan, in April, early May, and then we can show some of the new vintage wines to you.
Oh, that sounds both delightful and also something I'd probably need to book 3 days off afterwards to recover from, but very happily so. I see c'est notre ami Joséphine Prieur joining us from France. Hello, Dan, and bonjour, Boela. Wish you all the best for this harvest 2022. Hope to pass in October this year. Bon vendage for my good winemaker friends. Merci bien, Joséphine. J'espère que nous allons vous voir later this year. It'd be great to have you with us. You'll definitely see me at that braai, Mr. Gerber. I'm looking forward to it. And you can maybe answer my final question in full when I see you then, but I'll put it to you now anyway, purely out of interest, and it's a broad, sweeping question. I think January you celebrated 21 years at Groot Constantia, so you've seen a fair bit happen in that valley. But if we go back 363 years, it all kicked off on a very low-key note. Now, 363 years later, what would you say is our greatest achievement? What's been the biggest success of South African wine since we kicked off so many, many years ago?
Jeez, Dan, you could have given me a heads up on that. I do think, I do think that's, I think we can be very proud of where we are internationally. I think our industry, we often talk about it, that we don't have all the big brands, and, that we're looking for those 150,000 bottle blends that sell for 5,000 or 6,000 rand a bottle. So yes, admittedly, that we're not there when it comes to those big brands, but I think when it comes to really understanding our vineyards and expressing what we are doing, it's definitely, I think, from outside Europe, and I must say actually sort of outside France, I think even including a lot of European countries, I do think that the South African winemakers have been for many, many years, really had a good understanding of our vineyards and trying to express what we are trying to do. It's very interesting today to listen to all the different regions. That we had Ed, from Higgins and Jenna and Durbanville, and guys are very proud of their regions and really sort of proud to express what they are having. The soil and the climate and everything, to express what they have. I do think that it's that we have a fair understanding of that and really sort of convey that. So we don't have the very big brands, but we have a lot of sort of small pockets of excellence in making some absolutely world-class wine. So I think we can be very proud of what we've achieved.
There are many who would echo exactly those sentiments. I am one of them. Well, thank you. Thank you for the wine, which is my wife asked me to keep some for her. I'm not sure that I will. It's going down particularly well, as is my rather exclusive Durbanville and a beautifully fragrant Sauvignon Blanc. It's made for a great collection of wine, almost as good as my collection of guests who've joined me this evening. So to Boela and to Jenna and to Ed, guys, thank you all very, very much. Ed, I'll be seeing you in Agulhas. Plan to trek out just as soon as I get a visa. Jenna, give my regards to the team and tell Martin I'll set aside a couple of days to come and have a chat to him. And will I get that braai ready with Duncan? I'll be joining you as well. Guys, thank you all so much. Have a lovely Thursday. Enjoy the rest of the wine and look forward to seeing you all in person soon. Cheers.
Thank you, Dan.
There we go. Gee, it's a horrible job having to run a wine show. A fascinating show. And I think for me, what really made this evening's show, aside from the fact that you had 3 great guests who've got such terrific stories to tell and such great brands to discuss and wines to showcase, is that it once again underscores the diversity of South African wine and the terroir which we're able to lay claim to, which is why we make such an incredible range of wine from so many different varietals, so many different styles, be it the different types of pinotages Boela alluded to, the different approaches to Sauvignon Blanc we got from Ed, the kinds of old style reimaginings that we're seeing out of Durbanville. It really does make South Africa such a fun and engaging place to drink wine. And with that, I shall say goodbye, but not before telling you a couple of things. If you haven't seen it yet, this week's show not only gives you a look at the new blends, the new varietals, the new releases to come out of Takara with Stuart Butter. I also had a chance to sit down at the Camps Bay Retreat with Mr. Copeland from Vonderling and drink some Method Ancestral bubbles made in the old way. It was a fascinating conversation. Both of those on this week's recorded episode, and that also includes news of a competition. You could be off to Bartony for the weekend and scoring a case of 5-star platter Chardonnay while you're at it. That is all on the show at the moment online, so please do go and check it out. If you join me on Monday, we're throwing forward to the Cape Wine Auction. I'll be joined by Raymond Ndlovu, the chair and the man behind Black Elephant Vintners, along with Wendy Applebaum from De Morganson and the man who played Niles in the Frasier series, Paul Kluver, from the estate of the very same name. I'm off to finish some Pinotage and some Red Blend and some rather nice Sauvignon Blanc. Have a terrific evening. Thank you for watching. We'll see you back again next week. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.